Welcome, everyone. My name is Elisa Torres Soto, and I'm a staff attorney at ELI and the program manager for the 2023 National Wetlands Awards. Since 1989, the National Wetlands Awards program has honored over 200 champions of wetland conservation. The program recognizes individuals who have demonstrated exceptional effort, innovation, and excellence in wetlands conservation at the regional, state, or local level. I'm very excited to welcome you today to our panel featuring 5 of the 6 of the 2023 National Wetlands Awards winners. Rebecca Swadek, the Director of Wetlands Management of the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, and the winner of the Wetlands Program Development Award. Scott Fisher, the Director of Land Stewardship for the Hawaii Land Trust, and the winner of the Local Stewardship Award. Matthew Hough, the Manager of Conservation Programs for Kansas of Dogs Unlimited, and the winner of the Promoting Awareness Award. Bingqing Liu, the Research Scientist and Deputy Director of Restore Act Center of Excellence for Louisiana, for the Water Institute, and the winner of the Scientific Research Award. And Charlotte Leonore Michaluk, high school student and the winner of the Youth Leadership Award. Welcome and congratulations again. And first, we're going to do a series of roundtable questions with the panelists, and then we're going to open up the floor for audience questions. Oh, sorry, Ray. Yeah. So first, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and share with us your career journey, your current work, and what got you interested in the wetlands field. And we're going to start with Rebecca.
Hey. So I'm Rebecca Swadek. I started, my career journey started when I was a little kid. I played in my grandparents' garden and in the dirt, and I got interested in science when I was in high school, and remembered that I really hated math and steered towards biology. After a couple years working in a lab, I also realized that I really loved sunlight and being outside. So I kind of steered a little bit towards the ecology side. I'm very proud of the fact that I graduated with a biology degree and I've never taken an anatomy class. So I had a couple of great professors in undergrad who kind of steered me in the plant ecology route, and series of nudges here and there, and some random events, which is basically kind of how I ended up where I am. But during grad school and after college, I worked as an intern for the Student Conservation Association in Yosemite National Park. And that was probably like one of the best experiences I ever could have had, just like literally wading through the river or falling in the river in most cases all day long. And then I went to grad school, worked for the Botanical Research Institute of Texas for 4 years. And then after that, had kind of through my grad research and stuff, was more interested in ecology and the applied route of science. And so I steered more into the restoration realm, and that's where I landed at New York City Parks, where I've been for the last 10 years. So I started as a field intern there, and slowly, well, in the field far less frequently now, but that's kind of how I got where I am.
Aloha mai kakou. Hello, everyone. Scott Fisher. I work as the Director of Aina Stewardship, or Director of Land Stewardship for the Hawaii Land Trust. And so my, journey into wetlands restoration in particular, very much like Rebecca, just a deep love for the outdoors from a very young age. I think probably all of our stories would kind of begin with that. So a lot of time out, beaches, mountain trails, playing in the rivers. When I was 17, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and in 1991, I was an infantryman, Marine Corps infantry, during the first Gulf War, and of course, hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil dumped into the Persian Gulf made me, the takeaway epiphany of that was how destructive humans can be at our worst, and so wanted to really shift that paradigm. And so got into my doctoral studies eventually led me to looking at an island in Papua New Guinea and how indigenous people can actually care for the land. And so there was a civil war on the island of Bougainville that I was studying. And as I finished my PhD, turned it in, and literally that day got an offer for a job, at least an interview, doing ecological restoration work at two places that I knew very well growing up, at what then eventually became the Waihe'e Refuge, and then another refuge on Maui, Nu'u, where I actually work more often now. And that's 20 years ago. And so really also pursuing education that whole time. I'm doing another PhD right now that's looking at how to design forests in a way that will stop wave energy from storms and tsunamis. And so that's really kind of where my focus is right now, is that upland component of the wetland system to protect it, to provide protection. So that's, yeah, where I'm at.
Thank you.
Yeah, I grew up in eastern Oklahoma on a little cow-calf ranch, basically, and we had lots of wetlands and water there, and just always gravitated towards that. And I was a little hillbilly kid, so lots of hunting and fishing opportunities, which kept me outside, and always loved that. And when I went to undergrad, I thought, well, I need to make money. I need to be an engineer. And like you said, I hate math. What am I doing? So I gravitated towards agronomy, ag, and soil science, and then realized, I'd really rather be working with wildlife and rangelands and wetlands. I went to an internship with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Illinois Partners Program, and got to do more with wetland programs there in 2007, and met my first EU biologist, and got to go out and do some levees and work on this duck club that needed help. And like, I think this is what I need to do. This seems like a good fit for me. So in grad school, I focused more into the wetland side of things, and working on soils and hydrology on wetlands with the wetland reserve program with USDA. And that's when I defended my master's, they said, well, what do you want to do with your career? And I said, I want to work for Ducks Unlimited. So that was where I went. I had a short job with Nature Conservancy in Idaho, and then moved into Nebraska, where I worked in the rainwater basins there, the Platte River particularly. And then we slowly moved into Kansas, working out of our Grand Island field office. And as the Kansas program grew, I went from an intern to a biologist, regional biologist, and then they actually split the manager job into two states. So I was promoted to just Kansas. I still live in Nebraska, but we went from me part-time to now we have seven full-time biologists and 2 engineers that are just specific to Kansas. So a lot of growth, and I just love it. We've got all sorts of interesting wetlands gravitating from the dry western part of the state with playas and the recharge of the Ogallala Aquifer to the east that has a lot of flooding and nutrient issues and things. So we've got a lot of diversity of issues and conservation to do. So.
Thank you. It's very nice to meet you all here, and thank you, Alyssa, for a great introduction. And I would like to start with why I'm interested in wetland work and how I got involved in wetland work, because it's sort of telling the story of my career journey. And I studied in Louisiana since 2015. I did my PhD at Louisiana State University. So I spent 5 years at LSU, and I think I got a great privilege of seeing the natural beauty of wetlands and also the ecological significance. And but I know the Louisiana's wetlands, they are not only globally recognized by its biodiversity or cultural heritage, they're really important for the coastal communities, and they act as a buffer to the extreme coastal events, and like hurricanes, storms, surge, and flooding. And Louisiana's wetlands also on the front line of climate change, and we frequently influenced by the storm, and we have subsidence and the sea level rise. and warming temperature. All of these factors affect our coastal wetlands. And actually, this is an inspiration for me. And I was thinking about how can I contribute a little bit efforts to preserve, to protect our wetlands. So this is the initial inspiration for me to get involved in the wetland work. And I think it also, the inspiration is a combination of personal experience and also the tremendous restoration and protection efforts that undertaken by state of Louisiana. When I was a student, I was seeing a lot of efforts there and the state of Louisiana putting together to develop the coastal master plans and how to implement it to our coast and to outline the strategic actions to enhance the coastal resilience of Louisiana. So this is another inspiration. After my graduation, after I'm done with PhD, I just joined the Water Institute as a postdoc. I gained a great opportunity to study there to conduct our wetland work with our state agency, Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, as well as Governor's Office of Coastal Activities. So it's not just a simple technical process conducting research projects or produce scientific information there. It is also a process of establishing the relationship and foster the trust, the credibility, how we can collectively solve the complex wetland issues with shared sense of purpose, right? And so I have so much passion working at the Water Institute because we have a great team there, and we use diverse methodologies to study wetlands. We do extensive field work. We use remote sensing technologies, and we also use numerical model to study future scenarios. I think all of these factors are great inspiration for me to continue the wetland research work. So in addition to serving as a research scientist at the Water Institute, I'm also the deputy director of Louisiana Center of Excellence. We're receiving funds from the U.S. Department of Treasury through our state agency and distribute the funding to the Louisiana-based universities. And it's a great effort, and together with our communities to support the wetlands relevant research and to enhance the resilience, coastal resilience in Louisiana. So that's my passion, and I will continue my work with this passion in the wetland field.
Thank you.
I grew up around coastal and inland wetlands, also with an immense appreciation for all living things. And I also think a lot of time at nature preserves played a significant role, which has led me to also focus on education and curriculum development. I feel like in this stage as a student, I am gathering experiences and skill sets to help further my initiatives and really seeing the importance of interdisciplinary and multifaceted endeavors, learning the science and the technology, but then also considering the history and how the history has developed the structures and systems and I think economy that we are living in today, and how that plays an important role in environmental policy and sustainable solutions. Also the psychology of how people react to different things and how to make environmental solutions seem more widespread desirable. And currently, I am motivated to make environmental solutions more accessible, and that includes developing more economically desirable environmental cargo ship technology, teaching about freshwater bioinvestment and upcycling, and also wetland data collection and conservation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to hear about your career journey and your contributions. Very inspiring as well. So we're going to talk about now challenges in terms of wetland protection. So wetland provide multiple services for wildlife, fish, and people. So could you provide examples of wetland services and why the protection of wetlands is so important? Anybody can chime in. You wanna start?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, obviously there's kind of like the low hanging fruit, right? The waterbird habitat, Hawaii has so many endangered species. 6 of our 7 waterbirds are endangered, which is not a good record to have. And so we want to turn the tables on that. But there's also a cultural element. Our streams in Hawaii were where we developed our taro patches, what are known as lo'ikalo. And that's where our food production started. And so our land tenure system, our land management system, all the historical and archaeological records seems to indicate that there is, as these practices developed, they actually, more sediment was kept off the reefs because these taro patches acted as sediment retention basins. And so the services that they provide are both promote our sustainability if we were to able to grow more food by preserving these wetlands, these riverine wetlands in particular. But also there's also a spiritual element. So all of our wetlands, 2 wetlands that I work in, have dragon goddesses who live in them. And so that spiritual element is something that we can't just ignore. There is a connection. So the dragon at the Waihe'e wetlands, 27-acre wetlands, is known as Kihavahine. And so people come there to recognize and to interact with not only what we call the Kino Lau, the bodily form of Kihavahine, but also the area that she inhabits. And so these multiple levels, there's habitat and there's sustainability. And then, of course, there's also the spiritual dimension, what we call a wahipana, a place where the stories that create our society indwell. So, yeah.
Okay, I would like to talk about the importance of wetlands in a perspective of climate change. So we all know that greenhouse gas emission is one of the big driver for the warming temperature and climate change. But what is the role of wetlands? And the healthy wetlands always is well known as the natural solution to support the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Why? Because these wetland plants, they has capability to absorb the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and build the carbon in their biomass and the soils. They can lock up carbon for quite a long time, for centuries. So it's a really great natural solution to reduce the greenhouse gas concentration, specifically the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. And so in this perspective, I feel like the restoration and protection of wetlands is very important. And we need to consider the carbon benefits of this restoration and conservation activities. And yes, especially considering the future scenarios. And we have frequent storms and also maybe the stronger intensity of the storm, and we have sea level rise, and we have the rising ocean temperature. All of these factors can degrade the health of wetlands. And when the wetlands convert into open water habitats, what will happen? And the carbon stored in their biomass and the soil will release back to the atmosphere. So that's an important reason why we need to protect it. And we also need to restore it to consider more carbon benefits.
Thank you. I also see in New Jersey where there's a lot of urban and suburban development, a lot of concern about floods and wetlands and the role of flood mitigation. I spoke at a hearing about strengthening inland flood protection rules. It was really interesting to see all of the different perspectives just within this one subtopic of flood as a significance of wetlands, seeing how there were concerns about damage to both property and lives, and also how that can disproportionately affect marginalized groups, leading to the environmental justice side of things. And then also even the ecological damage and significance contributing to the drinking water sources, since wetlands can be headwaters and also can play an important role in filtration as well.
I think coming from the New York City perspective, it's a city of nearly 9 million people. You can't discount the people in the environmental perspective. Over 500,000 people live within a walking distance of a park with a wetland or a stream or some sort of other coastline. It is literally the fabric of the city. And so I think, after every single hurricane that we've had in the last, decade, Sandy included, slightly over a decade ago, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that where we see flooding is what was a historical wetland. It's either a stream that was buried, a wetland that was filled, et cetera, et cetera. And so, just obviously such teeny tiny fragmented wetlands aren't going to be able to necessarily provide the vast amount of coastal protection that, large, healthy, intact ones would, but they still provide, quantifiable benefits and really tangible benefits to any sort of community inland or directly along the coast. And just not only for, their own physical storm protection, but also just from a mental health aspect. There have been studies that have shown just even visual access to water can provide tangible, quantifiable mental health benefits. And so just even passive recreation, I think that's something that just really can't be discounted.
I think in our area, of course, water is often a limiting factor, and historic wetland conservation has been really on the backs, like ducks unlimited. It goes back to 1937 and, built on the backs of the hunting culture, and conservation really was funded a lot around that hunting aspect. But now with hunter numbers declining, those advocates and those people pushing for that conservation and funding that conservation are dwindling. So we have to find new ways to advocate and find people that are constituents for wetland conservation. So particularly in our area, aquifer declines, working with wetlands, biowetlands specifically, to recharge the local aquifers, wetlands that help with water quality, reducing sediment, nitrates, phosphorus, that kind of thing, are huge. And we meet with municipalities in Western Kansas and never talk about waterfowl numbers. We're talking about water. And that really resonates, because everybody needs water, whether they know it or not. They may not know what a wetland is, but trying to find those advocates and make sure that from the ecosystem goods and services of wetlands are well known. So when people, go to the ballot box or to fundraise for whatever that is, to make sure that that's hopefully somewhat in the back of their mind why wetlands are important.
Thank you so much. So let's focus on your work, Dr. Liu, for a moment, which studies the relationship between coastal wetlands restoration projects that help increase an area's resiliency, but can also serve as carbon sinks. Could you briefly walk us through your research and what have been your findings so far?
Sure, I'm happy to, and thank you for the opportunity. So as I mentioned, we have been working with the Governor's Office of Coastal Activities and our state agency, CPRA, the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, because we want to evaluate how our wetland behave with and without the restoration efforts in carbon sequestration. As you know, there are diverse wetlands in Louisiana with extensive coverage. And we want to firstly quantify the carbon fluxes of wetlands, how they emit the greenhouse gas into atmosphere, how they capture the carbon dioxide into their biomass and into the soils. These all of the important parameters we need to quantify. And we did a lot of work from field, and we use cutting edge remote sensing technologies to map those parameters to drive our numeric model to predict the carbon sequestration for current condition and future scenarios in the face of climate change. And the interesting result is that we found, okay, for current conditions and the vast majority of wetlands, they serve as net carbon sink, means they sequester carbon into their body and soils. But for the fresh marsh, because the salinity is low and they emit a lot of methane there, so this still serve as a net carbon source. So it really depends on different marshes you studied, and their role is different in carbon sequestration. But consider we have a large coverage of salt marsh. So we have a huge carbon sink for coastal Louisiana for current conditions. But as I mentioned, we have land loss because of sea level rise, because of the storms, and our wetlands convert into the open water by 2050, and there are a large amount of wetlands lost into the water, and the carbon there lost into the water. We need to figure out the amount of carbon lost into the water and then to the atmosphere. And this is where we have huge uncertainties and we don't know. We can only rely on the numerical model. But what we have seen from the model behaviors, we know that by 2050, our entire coastal wetland gonna become a natural, become a net carbon source. That's very sad. And that's a motivation for us to do more to restore and protect our wetlands. And also another very interesting phenomenon is that because of the rising temperature and our black mangrove habitats is expanding into the salt marsh. And the black mangrove is huge carbon that it is a habitat has huge carbon benefits. They have woody biomass and they store more carbon in their above ground biomass. So it's kind of hard to tell you the climate change effects on the carbon sequestration in wetlands. And you had to dig into details for very regional specific topic. And but right now we conducted a coastal-wide estimate, and we are digging into different basins based on different habitats, and we use remote sensing technique. We leveraging the power of advanced technologies like machine learning, deep learning to do the habitat classifications and apply those results to our model to study small scales and to reduce the uncertainties. And in the meantime, I do want to mention that a key aspect of our methodology is co-production of science. And we bring together, this involves the collaborations among the scientists, the managers and the policymakers. We really bring together different expertise and a different knowledge system. This helps us to produce the solutions that is not only scientifically sound, but also socially and politically feasible. And so that we can produce more effective and relevant outcomes for the decision-making process. And our Water Institute have strong emphasis on the applied science, and we hope we can incorporate the scientific information into the decision-making process to work together to enhance the coastal resilience in Louisiana.
Thank you very much. It was definitely very interesting research. So going back to you, Rebecca, could you explain to the audience what is the watershed approach and what opportunities does it provide to wetland management, restoration, and conservation?
Sure. I think when I think often, probably not often practitioners, but often when people think of wetland conservation, they're thinking of, okay, we have to protect this place, this one, particular location. And I mean, I grew up in Texas. The things that I learned about in school were, the dead zone in the Mississippi River from, farming all throughout the entire river corridor. I learned about the Ogallala Aquifer and like how so much throughout the larger area and it's really important to overall protection and just land management. And translating that to New York City, you're looking at a place that has filled the vast majority of it. Streams are disconnected from their original courses, they're piped underground, they're not connected to their tidal estuaries anymore. So you have, lack of sedimentation that deposits on salt marshes, and so marshes are drowning. And so, really, we try to look inland and more holistically and not just think about, okay, this place had this problem or we have money to restore this one location, but really look back and dig into what the original source of the problem was and if we can do anything about that. And sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but one thing that we're always looking for or striving to do better about is really just to manage stormwater in the built landscape and really connect, even connecting people to their local street tree bed and the amount that can do to reduce flooding in their environment, or just to think about how much stormwater capture we can do in the street lessens the pressure on our sewer systems and then improves water quality downstream in the estuary. So just thinking holistically about the overall place and the connections that water really has throughout a watershed and not just the place itself, I think is really important and really has to be considered in order to manage land well in many instances.
Thank you so much. Staying, I think, on a similar topic. So what about working on protecting wetlands in more densely populated areas where the benefits that wetlands provide are not as evident to most of the people that live in that area? So how do you make that connection to help citizens understand the importance of protecting local wetlands?
I can go ahead and take. So the other day, I happened to be working on planting for a restoration that we just finished. And I was walking up to the site and a girl came out and approached me and asked some questions. And I will step back and preface this with, we had a study that the US Forest Service actually did on our parks by interviewing thousands and thousands of users about a decade ago. And the main kind of takeaway message from that was people have a mad love for their parks. Their backyard, they're their community fabric, they're where they go to get away. Sometimes they're their only green space. People really love their parks. So often when I come out, I'm like, it's either going to be oh yay or it's going to be anger. It's going to be one of the two, and I never know which one. But she was like, are you guys building a park? Because we piloted a restoration approach to place sediment on a wetland that was a salt marsh that was drowning and really, really degraded. So she comes out her window or looks at her window before this is planted and sees what looks like a really nice peach and higher above the water line. And I said, no, we're actually restoring a wetland. And I explained to her, kind of what that was and said that we're trying to make it look like the rest of this and explained, flood benefits and water quality benefits and birds and all of those values. And she said, that's really cool. But, the water comes up really high and are the plants going to make it? And I said, oh yeah. I was like, they're adapted to that. And I started talking about Spartina ultraflora and how, they sweat salt, like kind of at least connected it to her and something that she could understand. And I was like, they're going to be fine. They're supposed to be there. And really just like taking the time to talk to her and to talk to anybody to answer their questions and make sure that they know why that this is important. Like she is literally a house that sits at probably 5 feet elevation, sea level, that backs up to a salt marsh. So having that, one-on-one connection and understanding of why this is important to you is really the way to get through to people, but you have to find what hits home with them, whether or not it's drought or birds or whatever.
Okay. Thank you. So Scott, you recently shared with the ILITE team a Hawaiian proverb that translates to "the land is the sheep and people are the servants." How has that proverb impacted you and your work, and why is fostering a commitment to caring for the land so important?
Yeah, thank you. So, my major interest is kind of what Rebecca was mentioning, is that, people are both the biggest challenge as well as your greatest resource and your greatest asset. So it's how you develop that paradigm. So it's really shifting the paradigm away from wetlands as being wastelands to wetlands as being as I mentioned earlier, a spiritual center and having all of these what we might call more generically resources, seeing it as a resource. So the actual Olelo no Eau, the proverb is Hele ika aina he kaua ke kanaka. And so as my students all know, when I start my class, we go through all of these proverbs and like, what was the paradigm that our kupuna, that our ancestors had? And how do our actions today not reflect that paradigm? So Hele ika aina he kaua ke kanaka is literally translated is the land is the chief and people are the servants. So our job is to actually shift our paradigm slowly so that we see the land, including wetlands, and especially wetlands in many ways. I mentioned earlier, there's spiritual centers as well as a resource to actually cultivate that sense of aloha aina, of love of the land. And then that aloha aina, that sense of that love of the land, will translate naturally then into malama aina, a desire to care for the land. So those three things. So it's really a paradigm shift. Is a society that values the land, that sees the land truly as a chief, would not dump hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into the ocean. And that's just a fact. If you value the land, you aren't going to damage it. If you see the land as your chief, that you serve the land. So really what it is, it's that slow flipping of our view of what it means to be on this land. And so the other Olelo no Ea that I really love, Kawa Mamua, Kawa Mahope, in order to know our future, we have to look to the past. And so that's why retrieving and transforming ourselves at that paradigm is really critical to my work, even though it has relatively little to do with the removal of invasive species and the planting of native species. That's the technical part. It's shifting people's paradigms that is most critical.
Oh, thank you so much. And Charlotte, you have designed a cargo ship prototype and a ship full coating inspired by shark skin to improve ship efficiency and reduce emissions, and created the concept for a hybrid wind and fossil fuel cargo ship that cleans exhaust while generating power from wind energy. If I got that right. And first of all, amazing, incredible. So what motivated you to work on creating those designs, and were there any challenges along the way?
I think a main motivation was from my data collection and advocacy and education side, really seeing in terms of conservation of inland wetlands, really seeing the challenges of conserving a piece of land that is both ecologically and economically valuable, as well as being really surprised to see that we have, particularly with Fletner rotors, which could provide cargo ship wind propulsion, seeing that they are about more than an order of magnitude more efficient than traditional sails, seeing that they have been developed for about the last 100 years, everything from the optimum aspect ratio to advanced composite materials, but then seeing that they still have not reached widespread deployment, seeing that their actual physical application on cargo ships is so limited, really brought to my attention the other factors, the organizational and economic limitations to sustainable solutions. And I was particularly interested in cargo ships because of their immense global influence, transporting about 90% of global trade, contributing to about 3% of global climate change causing emissions, and then particularly because of their high sulfur fuel content, contributing to acid rain and that subsequent impact on wetlands. So putting all of those things together, seeing the struggle of balancing economic and environmental motives, seeing how these technologies have such great potential, really inspired me to design something, a multi-purpose device that was space efficient and economically desirable, that would also increase the attractiveness and the deployment of environmental technologies to really get to the root of the problem by tackling this such an impactful part of the shipping industry and also just the world in general. I think in terms of challenges in general, it can be overwhelming when dealing with things such as climate change and environmental issues, but being able to see through outreach and teaching that beautiful transformation of when someone comes in thinking that frogs are slimy and gross, but then giving them that opportunity to have a positive experience can completely shift their perspective. And that's what really gives me inspiration and hope and helps work through challenging times.
Thank you so much, and we're very excited to celebrate Charlotte's accomplishments as a young wetlands leader. And to all of you on this panel, why it is important for youth to be involved in the wetlands field. It's a fun start.
So I part of what I do is research and stewardship, caring for the land, but also about a third of the work that I do is connecting people to land. And a good portion of those people are young people. In fact, we have a full education program. And so when I'm starting off my talk, getting people, welcoming them to the land before we take our hike, I oftentimes will say that, we only protect those things that we love, and we only love those things that we know. So connecting people to land is that first step, because otherwise it doesn't become something that is valuable. I think so many of us who work in conservation had a emotional connection to the land from a young age. And that is something that I think as wetlands professionals, as conservation professionals, we have an obligation to pass on to the next generation. Our work has to last hundreds of years, and we can't do that alone. We have to pass that on to the next generation.
I think Scott nailed it. We've got to educate the young folks. We have a program where we go into the elementary schools and high schools and actually teach the kids about, in Western Kansas, about the aquifer under their feet. They don't have a clue, a lot of times. And a lot of those kids are going to grow up to be, leaders, voters, farmers, ranchers, all of the above. So just getting them early and educating them is the only way that we're going to continue to make any kind of progress. It's critical.
All right, so we're gonna open it up for audience questions, and I'll just get this started. We have a question from our virtual audience. So how do you adapt or adjust over your careers to different political climates, local, regional, or federal, that may support environmental concerns more or less? anyone can take this one.
I've been real fortunate that there's been tremendous consistency. I think what in Hawaii, that aloha aina, that sense of love of land has been consistent and persistent. So it's not a daily challenge that I face, but you do have to address the concerns of people who may not share the same values. So that's, just a reality. So when I guess the way I would put that into like that question into like in my daily interactions, how do you deal with someone who doesn't hold that same value, who would rather see, wetlands filled in because it's wasteland? And so then it becomes my obligation to inform, not necessarily to persuade, but to inform about the value of the land. And I have found pretty consistently that most opposition to land protection, land stewardship, generally derives from a lack of awareness, for lack of a better word, ignorance. They don't understand, and then so that's the primary position that I take, is like I want to listen to what they have to say so that I can address it. And we may not see eye to eye, but educating is the public in general is a critical part of all stewardship.
I think in general, taking into account political situations and policy is definitely very impactful and crucial. Seeing how a lot of sustainable debates and struggles of regulation, deregulation, what role state and federal government can play in environmental policy is definitely just in general something really important to be aware of and talk about.
I think from my standpoint, we have a vast inventory of data about our wetlands, our streams, et cetera. And, we know what we need and where we need it. I think there's certainly an adaptation and prioritization and framing and who can go to what for funding. Fortunately for us, the state of New York has always been a really supportive funder of environmental work, and know the feds are too in many instances, but we've always had the challenge of, oh my God, everything is so expensive in New York City, and so we don't ever win in that. We get enough wins in other areas, so it's fine. But from that standpoint, I've been really excited to see the shift, basically be able to kind of follow the shift in framing and wherever your elected leaders are focusing. So I'm really hopeful that this renewed trend in environmental justice will really bring some necessary resources at the federal level where they're really needed, and will really drive some funding. But like I said, a lot of it is framing and understanding who values what and how you kind of tweak those arguments to fit what might be the ecological argument that you've been presenting all along, just seeing it through another lens. So
definitely know your audience and be able to adapt to what's important to them. I totally agree with that, because we've got a combination of folks that are interested in recreation to the farming community, where basically they're a nuisance, so we're trying to figure out ways to connect with them. We're lucky that most people aren't against wetlands, typically it's more about, why are they important, and just an education issue.
From my standpoint, I like to see the engagement with broader communities, stakeholders, state managers, policymakers is very important. And for researchers, we need to know that, and our research experience can be a very iterative process from through the research journey, and with ongoing feedbacks and adjustment all the time. We need to open up we need to make our research work align to some practical application, and we also need to establish an open lines for the communications, and we need to recognize and accept the difference from different knowledge system and perspective, and try to continually adjust and refine our research with the ongoing process. Definitely, it's not a one-day task, and it's a iterative process from the first to the from the beginning to the end of your project.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open the, yeah, Sarah, please go ahead.
So I would just like to say, first of all, thank you so much for all of your efforts. I think that you've all spoken to centering education and engaging the community in your answers and in your work. And if we weren't wetland lovers before now, we definitely are. And so my question is, what can everyday people and non-wetland specialists do today to help advance your efforts and advance restoration?
Volunteer. That is such a critical thing. This year at one of the wetlands that I manage, we were able to get 340 trees planted in one area. And we do more than that in other areas, but these 340 trees that we planted are a good start, but they're just the beginning. And they were, of those 340, probably 330 were planted by volunteers. More importantly, though, that they need to be sustained, and so the area where they are planted is also a dry area. So in order to get them, to get those trees going through the what we call the kauvela, the hot season, the summer, we'll need those volunteers to come back. And so if being consistent and persistent, what we were able to do is link. We have camping on our properties. It's on the coast. It's right on the beach. Very popular area to camp. So we link the volunteering with with camping. So if you want to camp, fine, but hulina lima ika lefo, turn your hands into the soil, or else you can come down anytime, but camping is reserved for those who participate. But at the same time, while they're camping, because they're always asking us, what can we do while we're camping? You can water the trees. We have water right there. You can actually help us water it. And so we have to coordinate that. So there's just so much, just simple things like volunteering. So that's my simple answer to that.
I think too, volunteering can be a great way to get involved. Definitely partly how I started with my wetland involvement and research and engineering. Since for about a decade now, I have been certified in chemical and biological water monitoring. And that is a volunteering role that people can do and be involved and collect data, understand trends and what's happening to the environment around them, to get a deeper awareness of the next steps and more specific things that can be worked on.
Outside of just physically going out and volunteering, there's also, there's a lot of great organizations that need your help. So, helping with your pocketbook is always appreciated. Lots of great foundations out there that may need a little nudge in the right direction to help support some of these community projects or bigger organizations that work at a more regional scope. But whatever your interests are, I'm sure there's somebody that could use a little help in that department.
Sure, I'm always surprised at the amount, like the sheer change that advocacy organizations really can affect. And I mean, on the flip side of advocacy, I mean, even outside of an organization, you can do that on your own. You can write to your elected officials, you can call them, you can show up and ask them questions at meetings and stuff like that. And at least in my experience, they often do listen, and those things do come out in the end. And so, and if they don't, then vote.
Yeah.
But vote no matter what.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Gordon, I'm the president of ELI. Thank you all so much for being here. It really is inspiring to hear about the work that you do and how you got here. Also, Charlotte, when I was in high school, I feel like I was still learning to tie my shoe. It's just absolutely incredible. But okay. But my question is generally, as we're talking about the need for engagement, right, and as being a continuing trajectory, you're talking right now to a bunch of environmental law policy. So when we talk wetlands, that means something to, right? You know, it's like we kind of generally know, am I supposed to be speaking for you? Thank you, sorry. So we kind of know what's encompassed in a wetland. My very specific question is, do you use the word wetlands when you're doing outreach, or are you talking about actually a local wetland? I mean, and that would be really interesting. You mentioned talking to elementary school and children. Do you actually go out and try and explain like kind of what a wetland is, or are you trying to provide that in a really local context? This is something I've struggled with kind of throughout my career. And I mean, I have 2 children who are 3 and 5, and I have actually tried to explain what a wetland is. And they are not excited. Talk about whatever, yeah, well, obviously, and literally my 5-year-old will start talking about like the animals there and etc. So I'd just be curious about like how you actually talk about it.
Yeah, so again, I have a phenomenal colleague who is a educator, and she's she oftentimes works with these very young people, kind of like oftentimes the youngest people we have are usually around 4 or 5 years old, and they come out onto the refuge, about 2,000 students a year. But for the elementary grades that you're specifically referring to, she made a picture book that flips through, and so it has movable parts and everything, and it's just phenomenal. So I don't personally work with children that young. Typically, I tend to work with the oldest I work with, or the youngest I work with, would be high school students. And do I use the word wetlands? All the time. Because there's been so much emphasis on wetlands, at least in Hawaii, that people are generally aware. Oh, it's where the IO and the Alaikeokeo, these birds live, and they also understand the concept of that's where you grow taro, and so there is a general cultural understanding in the Hawaiian Islands, and so then it's just building on that. So that's really where we do. But again, the work of my phenomenal colleague has really kind of laid the groundwork so that when they come back, and we're now seeing, just after 20 years, we're now seeing children who were maybe middle school 20 years ago now having their own children coming back. That's really exciting because they can share what their experience was. And that generational connection is also very important. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
It kind of depends on your audience, we have, I think elevating the word wetland is a good thing, just so we're all collectively, on the same page of what we're talking about and raising the awareness of why wetlands are important. But when you get to the local level, if you're in Texas, they call them tanks, and if you're going to flies or tanks for some reason, and some people call them buffalo wallows, and just trying to when you're working with a landowner or kids that grew up in a certain area, you may want to use the local nomenclature just to connect with them. But definitely, promoting wetlands in general, I think is going to be critical.
For sure. I think using the word is important. I think also, you hit it with the word experience. The organization that I worked for before this was Botanical Research Institute of Texas, and they had a huge education branch really focused on experiential education. And we used to get really frustrated with a couple of educators from the work side, because they wouldn't just tell you what they wanted, and everything was a teaching moment. And so they would lead you slowly towards it. And I think, sometimes we have such an emphasis on facts, which are important, but also, why don't you know the specific definition of this, that, and the other? And I think with little kids, sometimes it maybe doesn't really matter. They know if they know how the dirt feels, if they know how the water feels, if they know how it makes them feel, if they know all the little critters that lives there, that's enough, and they'll get the rest of it when they grow up.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Anybody else? We have space for one more question. Sorry.
I'm currently working with parents and of this project,
on advancing the natural and nature-based infrastructure in the Mississippi River Basin, specifically through Army Corps. And one thing that's come up in this project and in other things I've worked on in the past is that climate change can be kind of a big, like, buzzword for people that makes them kind of shut down and stop listening. And so specifically for people who work in the Mississippi River Basin, are there words like climate change that you don't use, and how do you address those topics when climate change is really affecting the river basin, but you might not be able to say that outright?
That's a really good question. The reason, well, it's a good question because you have to understand your audience, and that's really critical. If what we're trying to do is shift paradigms, understanding your audience is critical. And so if I say climate change to a certain audience, and a small percentage of the people, admittedly, well, climates have always changed. That's like, oh man, well, yeah, they have, but we're causing this acceleration. So again, it kind of comes down to how maintaining a cheery disposition is critical to not turning people off and actually beginning to understand. And there's really a whole psychology and dynamic there. Are there particular words that I avoid? Not really, because what I'm hoping to do, if it does provoke them, I want to know why it provokes them. And then we can have a discussion about that. In Hawaii, we're with wetlands in particular. The word for in Hawaiian, in Olelo Hawaii, is WAI, wai. But that's water, right? But Kahavai is a stream, Ainavai is a wetland, but also Kanavai is the law. So at the heart of the legal system in Hawaii was water. And to be wealthy, you have vai, right? So water doubled makes you wealthy. So there's always this, especially for wetlands, it's a really, it gives you a foundation. Now I'm just using that as an example of how you how do I pull people in? I can say things like, well, I know the paleoecology of this particular area. So it's important to invite people to have conversations without actually alienating them. And that's ultimately what I think I found most successful.
We use the words drought resiliency and increase your soil carbon, or there's ways to connect with people when that climate change might be a hot button issue.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we've reached the end of this discussion. I want to thank our panelists for sharing about their work and accomplishments. And we look forward to celebrating you tonight at our 34th National Wetlands Awards ceremony. And thank you to all of those who joined virtually and those of you who joined in person today. Thank you so much.